Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. I'm Ken Calvert alongside my very dear friend, Father Joe Grimaldi. The Father Joe podcast is proudly supported by Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln, 12 Mile and Telegraph in Southfield. The spring savings sales event is going on now at Star Lincoln, and that means additional savings on every Lincoln in stock. Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln, they treasure your time. Experience the Star treatment. If you're in the greater Detroit area and you're looking for a new Lincoln, then Star Lincoln is the only answer. Whether you crave a new Lincoln MKC, Lincoln MKX, the classic Lincoln Navigator, or the awesome Lincoln Nautilus, get the Star treatment. You deserve it. Give them a call, drop on by, and you'll see why. They've been in business for decades. Both Father Joe and I are driving the Lincoln MKC, and I love mine. In a hurry, shop online, starlincoln.com. Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln, 12 Mile and Telegraph in Southfield, home of the Star treatment. So how are we feeling today, Father Joe?
We are feeling fine.
Here we are now into the third week of Easter.
Correct.
Things going well, based on what you can see?
It's rejoicing all the time.
Never stops.
No.
It never, ever stops. Still wearing the whites.
And the risen Lord is among us.
That's right. That's right. The candle, that's a quick question for you.
Sure.
The Easter candle.
Right.
It has a lifeline that's pretty good, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
I mean, it barely ever reaches the very bottom.
Correct. Yes.
You ever seen one?
No.
No, I haven't either. What do you do with the Easter candle at the end of the year?
There's a place where you can send them, and they get remelted if you want, and refigured. But in any case, it's blessed every year at the eve of Easter.
The vigil.
The Easter vigil.
Mm-hmm. You know, a lot goes on that night.
Yes.
A lot goes on that
night. Well,
the
candle represents Christ. It represents faith. It represents all those things.
Yeah. Okay, I was just curious. I thought of that as, so it's reutilized. It's refurbished.
In some way, yes. In some way. Yeah.
And what exactly is on the candle? What is the various markings?
Well, you have the beginning, the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, which is Christ himself. Yep. They usually have the year, so 2019, and basically that's it. They have certain things that look like the nails, if you want, that will put in the cross, and they stick them into the candle itself.
We used to do that as kids, and I think we would use like cinnamon cloves.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, and we would push them
that.
in, you know.
You got it. You got it.
Well, good little Catholic kid.
You are.
That is not our topic, by the way, today. I was noticing the other day, I was reading an article from a priest who had an addiction problem. He was an alcoholic. Well, he is an alcoholic. You're an alcoholic.
Forever.
It's a battle. It's easier for some, tougher for others. There's a lot of starting over. There are all sorts of outreach programs available for people that have the disease alcoholism. It also shows up. It's not immune to those who are in the religious, the priests, the nuns.
Correct.
I suspect the deacons, and of course,
human beings.
Human beings. It's a battle. What do priests and the other religious do when they suspect, or do they know that they have a drinking problem?
Well, you answered a lot of the questions yourself already. It's a disease. Alcoholics have an X factor that can actually, I think, be identified, and so that no matter what, that person is always going to be an alcoholic. Well, as we know, alcoholism is something you don't get cured from. You're constantly in recovery, okay? So they use the present tense when you're recovering alcoholic. It doesn't mean that you're drinking. It just means that you still have the tendencies of an alcoholic. I want to preface whatever I say with the fact I am not an expert in this by any means. But having been living the religious life with brothers And now, as a priest, I do see people who are alcoholics and deal with them on a regular basis. I'm not speaking just of the lay folks, but also of the religious themselves. It's a disease which your brothers and sisters could probably tell you before you say anything yourself. It's one of these things where you notice that this person is never satisfied with 1, 2, or 3 drinks. It's going to be more. Very often it's not public, which is another thing. Mm-hmm. The best thing an alcoholic can do, and he's is famous for that, he or she, they know exactly where and how to hide their bottle. As a matter of fact, being religious, they all have good friends that mean well and will buy the liquor for them, and they know exactly how and where to hide it. And it's amazing to me, okay? You would never know that this is happening. The other thing, too, an alcoholic very often does not show. Like, we always have the stereotype person who is drunk falling over and everything else. Sometimes an alcoholic can hide it well. Actually, some are functional. Mm-hmm. They go to work every day. They could be head of corporations, head of archdioceses, and they could still be alcoholic. They're able to function well with the liquor within them. However, they are suffering. It's a sickness. There's no question about it. It's not until they fall far enough down that they realize they have to help themselves. Because unless they really do, in my mind, it's very difficult for them to say, okay, I'm an alcoholic and I need help. Now, when someone falls down completely and asks for help, that's a sign of hope, because mm-hmm. that's where the person can get rehabilitated if he's willing. If he's not willing, nothing we do or say can have that person get the help he or she needs. So it's important that the individual himself asks for the help. Obviously, we know about the AA programs that exist everywhere, whether we know it or not. They're in a lot of our churches. They meet as much as they can, sometimes once a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, mm-hmm. depending on the need of the individual. Many churches allow their facilities to be used by the Alcoholics Anonymous group, and they are a great help. Usually there is a sponsor involved for an individual who needs that help to make sure that that person goes to the meetings as often as he or she needs. So it's kind of an interesting thing to see that. Now, very often we have this idealized picture of brothers and priests and nuns, where how could they possibly be alcoholics? Well, they're human beings. And if it's a disease, anyone who is human can get that disease. Unfortunately, with the alcoholics, I am told, again, I'm not an expert, there is an X factor within that individual that makes him or her an alcoholic. And if they're diagnosed with that X factor, they are alcoholics. There's nothing that they can do to help that, except they have to want to stop the symptoms or stop the drinking and whatever else will help them, continue that lifestyle. But usually they're people who function like everybody else, and very often you don't know it until it's too late.
It's interesting because I remember hearing the expression. I remember hearing once a friend of mine who's in AA, and it's been at least 20, 25 years.
Sure.
He said to me once, luckily I hit rock high, not rock bottom. And I said, what do you mean? What's the difference? He said, I realized I was an alcoholic, and before I destroyed my marriage and my relationship with my kids, I stopped and I got help. He said, because I was getting dangerously close to hitting rock bottom. Okay. I was not performing well at work. I was rather pulling over into parking areas and acting like I was looking up a phone number or something and taking literally straight sips of vodka out of bottled water, or looked like a bottle of water.
Sure.
He said I would drive my car, get to a stoplight, and take a hit of vodka. And he said, I realized that at some point I was going to hurt somebody, and hopefully only himself, and not kill somebody.
Correct.
Because he was getting drunk at the same time. And so he realized that he needed to do something, and he did, and good for him. Good for him. Everything's fine. Everything's wonderful now. On the other hand, rock bottom is not a good place to be.
No.
Intervention is a big thing on occasion when it's so obvious that you just have to sit somebody down and say, look, you have a problem. Have you ever been on a counseling side of another priest or a brother saying, can we talk?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, having lived in community, that very often there's one or two that are alcoholics. And one of the saddest things I ever experienced was living with a brother who was in his room for 3 days before people found him on the floor. He had just collapsed. He didn't come to until 3 days later.
Really?
And so it was one of these things that was earth-shattering. A brilliant, that's another thing I want to say. Maybe because when people are highly sensitive, very often they tend to be alcoholics for some reason or other. I don't know what the reason is, but very often it hits people that are very, very sensitive, very sharp, very acute. So it's an interesting thing to me.
That
to
is
see
amazing.
That. Yeah.
That's really an interesting takeaway.
Yeah.
Finishing with your colleague.
We finally found him.
And that was it for him, right? I mean, it was like, okay, now we're going to address this.
That time.
Yeah. And did he address it?
That time. So what happens is they go to a rehabilitation center for religious, very often it's guest house. Mm-hmm. And they do a tremendous job at guest house, there's no question. But then something may spark in that individual later on, and they'll start drinking again. So they need to have a repeat of that rehabilitation. Sometimes it takes 1, 2, or 3 times before the person actually does stop drinking. Mm-hmm. But it's not easy for them. I mean, it's so easy for us to look at them and say, well, why can't he just stop? Look at what he's doing. Well, it's not easy. First of all, we live in a society when we tend to find recreational drinking the thing to do. You know, but whenever we gather as a group, well, people are going to have drinks, they're going to have wine. And interestingly enough, I was reading recently where there's kind of a movement, and you may know more about this than I can. There's a movement to establish, instead of bars, a place where people can go, truly have a great time, and there be no alcohol at all being served, but interesting drinks that are put together so that they are drinking non-alcoholic beverages and still having a great time, whether it be dancing or interacting and so on. Have you heard of that at all?
I have heard of that. It would probably certainly favor the non-drinkers, having a good old time, but without alcohol. But with non-alcoholic drinks that would look or taste like.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. A non-alcoholic beer.
I just read that, whether it was Time Magazine or one of those, where these establishments are coming about. I don't know how popular they are, but they certainly are coming about.
I will tell you a story. Not too long ago, probably 5 years ago, and a friend of mine had a party to celebrate his 25th anniversary, and had a big job, has a really, really big job. He and his wife celebrating 25 years of marriage, 2 kids, and the daughter was graduating at the same time that he had this 25th wedding anniversary. Well, he invites a select group of people, only people that were invited to the wedding, and it was a small wedding, were invited back 25 years later to go to the party.
Great.
We go to the party, and I hadn't seen some of these people in a long time. We all go in. We're dressed to the nines. Beautiful home. Guy's covered his swimming pool, put a floor down, and got a DJ and a stage for the band, the whole 9 yards. Go over to the bar to get a beer. My buddy wanted a martini. Bartender says, oh, no, no alcohol. Well, you would have thought that everybody was like, what do you mean no alcohol? What do you mean? No, the host would prefer no alcohol. His daughter is celebrating her her high school graduation.
Oh, okay.
You would have thought that somebody just took a giant plug and pulled it out of the fun. It's like, lighten up, folks. So, I mean, sometimes people go into the event just expecting and hoping for a nice drink.
I'm finding, too, though, that what's interesting is an opposite situation where people do not like to drink. Not because they're opposed to alcoholism or being drunk. They just don't like it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they're forced into it at times just to be social.
Yep.
And so they drink it, not wanting to, and it doesn't even taste good to them. Mm-hmm. For someone who doesn't like it, it's kind of a penance to sit there and sip on this drink that you don't even want.
Yeah.
And so instead of feeling free to just say, may I have a Diet Coke or an iced tea or something like that, maybe just to make it look presentable, just have water with a slice of lemon in it or something like that.
Yep.
In any case, it's kind of interesting because I do know people do not like liquor, but when they go to parties, they hold one anyway, and it has alcohol in it. They kind of sip it, and they look for the first chance they can to put it aside.
Yeah, right.
But they want to feel included.
Put it on the waiter's tray.
Yeah, they want to feel included.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that.
Which is so strange.
You mentioned something to me before we got started. You said that this also applies to the ranks that include nuns.
Oh, sure. Well, they're human beings.
Of course. But for some reason, that tends to surprise me.
Well, everybody, I think, is surprised by that. Yeah.
How would that happen? How does that happen?
An alcoholic needs alcohol. And one of the things they are very skillful in doing is acquiring and hiding. And they hide in such a way, whether it be under the bushes in the backyard or whether it be in the linen closet of their home or whatever the case might be. So if somebody really needs that, they have friends that will bring them a bottle, especially if it's a religious. Mm-hmm. And, they say, oh, poor sister, come on, that's the best thing. Just bring her, And, there's so many jokes around where, you have the sister coming with the cup, and so the drink is poured into the cup so it won't look like she's having a drink.
Yeah.
This type of thing. That's not so far-fetched. There are situations where the sisters who are alcoholic, those who need to have their drink, know how to get it because they have close friends, and they usually know how to disguise it, and they feel that nobody's ever going to notice, and maybe they don't until they themselves have such a need that it becomes evident.
Two things real quickly. Number one, you said the operative word up front, functioning alcoholic.
Sure.
It's amazing how you're like, what? He or she was an alcoholic?
Correct.
I saw him all the time at lectures. Nobody did a better conference room than he does. And he had a skill set on him, So functioning alcoholics, I suspect, again, it's applicable to the religious ranks. It's easy to I shouldn't say easy.
Or the corporate world.
Corporate, that's what I was talking about when I said he runs a good conference room. But I'm sure that priests can say a mass. Priests can do a really solid sermon. Nuns could probably easily teach a class and teach a very high-level class. Mm-hmm. The other point I was going to make to you about it, I remember talking on a number of occasions to rock stars because rock stars partied hardy in the 80s and the 90s, and now so many of them have quit drinking. And I said to one, and I won't mention his name, I said, why did you quit? When did you know? He said, I just got tired of getting up feeling awful. He said, I couldn't stand it anymore. It got harder as I got older. I just couldn't do it.
I just want to say something else for what you said.
I have a question.
Some people, let me put it this way, that they don't, early on, we can almost identify, and again, I'm not an expert, identify someone who is an alcoholic and someone who isn't. An alcoholic doesn't easily get sick from over-drinking. Eventually, but they can keep on drinking. They function beautifully. someone who doesn't have that X factor very often gets very sick even after the second or third drink.
Right.
And they can't drink anymore. They just don't want it. It doesn't agree with them, and so on. So that could be a tricky situation because you have the individual who just keeps going, and he doesn't look like anything is wrong with him. He just keeps drinking. Well, that's almost a sign that person is an alcoholic. In my mind, again, I'm not an expert, but for the other person to get sick, it's almost a blessing to be able to get sick after the second drink because
I don't like it.
You don't belong in that.
I don't like it, and I don't like getting sick.
I'm sorry to have interrupted you
but
on that, but
that's a very interesting takeaway as well.
On a humorous note, when I lived in Italy, people are always amazed and would say to me, you know what, in the United States, are most people alcoholics? And I would say, why? Why do you ask that? Well, all the movies we see that are American-made, they usually have a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Whenever they're at home or whenever somebody comes into the house, they always grab the bottle and they have a drink, or even in the evening when they just want, they're always, I just, no, I think that's just the movies, okay?
Right.
Not everybody does that.
No, we don't do it that way.
By the way, do you have a drink?
Yeah, I've got that little caddy right here behind my microphone. You see, I've got some scotch and button. You think about Mad Men, the series. Those guys were drinking all day and all night. It never stopped. To put a proper bow on this, if you're in any sort of a situation where you think maybe you have an issue, how do you recommend people approach that?
Well, first of all, I hope that we all have best friends.
Yeah.
People that you can really talk with and be open with and not afraid to let people know what's going on. People that are truly best friends. If you have that kind of a situation, if you feel that in some way you need help, you might just be open about it and say, lately I've been thinking, and I think it's risen to the point of it's getting serious. I need help. Where do you think I should go? Well, if the person doesn't know, when it comes to religious, the first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is guest house. But there are other rehabilitation centers that are besides that. AA is really very, very good and very important, because even those in guest house, when they leave, have to make sure that they go to their appointments or go to their meetings on a regular basis. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any one set way of doing it.
Well, I think we may talk about this again down the road, because I find it an important topic to bring up, and we've never talked about it before for an entire podcast. But thank you. Thank you for enlightening me, and we will look forward to seeing everyone on the next Father Joe podcast, reminding you as well to please tell your friends about the Father Joe podcast, show them how to get it, and ask them to please give it a listen. We would certainly appreciate that. And I will see you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
I look forward to seeing you again, too. Take care. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.